The monster revealed. The city was alive with lights and noise, its towering skyscrapers glowing against the dark sky. But tonight, there was no peace. The emergency alarm screamed through the streets, its shrill sound bouncing off the steel and glass buildings. People ran in panic, seeking shelter as the voice of the city's AI system echoed. Attention! An unidentified hostile entity has entered the city perimeter. All citizens are advised to seek immediate cover. Amid the chaos, Eli stood frozen on the edge of the crowd. He was a young mechanic, barely noticed in the grand scheme of the bustling metropolis. Tonight, however, he couldn't turn away from the spectacle unfolding in front of him. A shadow moved through the foggy streets, massive and terrifying. The creature's form became clearer as it stepped under the harsh streetlights. It was tall, at least 3 times the height of a human, with a body that looked like a blend of sleek armor and organic tissue. Its glowing eyes, sharp and predatory, scanned its surroundings, and its clawed hands flexed as if ready to strike. The soldiers arrived within moments, their boots stomping in unison as they formed a perimeter around the creature. Armed drones buzzed above them, their red targeting lasers locking onto the beast. "Do not engage," shouted their commander through a megaphone. "Hold your positions and await orders." Eli could feel the tension in the air, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The creature didn't move to attack. It just stood there, its head turning slowly as though it were searching for something. "Why isn't it attacking?" Eli whispered to himself. The crowd murmured in fear, some whispering tales of destruction caused by similar creatures in other parts of the galaxy. This one was no different, they said. A monster. A killer. But Eli wasn't so sure. As he watched, the creature took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The soldiers tensed, raising their weapons. The crowd gasped. And then, to everyone's shock, the creature spoke. "Help me." The words were soft but unmistakable. Its voice was deep and resonant, filled with something Eli couldn't quite place. Fear, desperation. The crowd didn't hear it clearly, but Eli did. His heart raced as he realized the creature wasn't acting like a mindless predator. Its glowing eyes, so fierce at first, now seemed sad. "Help me," it said again, this time louder. The soldiers didn't wait. The commander shouted, "Open fire." A barrage of bullets and plasma beams shot through the air. The creature roared, a sound that shook the ground beneath Eli's feet. It raised one massive arm, a shimmering shield of energy forming around it. The projectiles bounced off harmlessly, scattering sparks and debris into the night. People screamed and fled, but Eli couldn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off the creature. It wasn't attacking. It was defending itself. The creature turned suddenly, its eyes locking onto Eli. For a brief moment, everything around him seemed to fade. Those glowing eyes were no longer terrifying. They were pleading. "Why is it looking at me?" Eli muttered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The creature took a step in his direction. The soldiers noticed and adjusted their aim. "Hold your fire," the commander barked, but some of the younger soldiers panicked, firing again. The creature growled in pain as a plasma bolt grazed its side. Without thinking, Eli stepped forward. "Stop," he shouted, though his voice was drowned out by the noise. The creature collapsed to one knee, its shield flickering. Blood, or something that looked like it, dripped from its wound. The light in its eyes dimmed slightly, but it didn't lash out. It didn't fight back. Eli's mind raced. This wasn't a monster. It couldn't be. A monster wouldn't beg for help. The creature lowered its head and spoke again, this time directly to him. "Help me," it said, the words almost breaking apart. Eli felt a surge of courage he didn't know he had. Ignoring the panicked crowd and the armed soldiers, he took a cautious step toward the creature. "Eli, don't!" a voice shouted from behind him. It was his friend Mara, pulling at his arm. "It'll kill you." But Eli shook her off. "It doesn't want to fight," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The soldiers noticed his movement and raised their weapons again. "Stand down, citizen," the commander shouted. "This is a restricted area." Eli ignored him. He walked closer to the creature, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. "It's okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "I'm here to help." The creature's glowing eyes flickered again, and for a moment it seemed to relax. Its massive claws lowered slightly, and it tilted its head, as if trying to understand this strange human standing before it. Behind him, the commander yelled, "Get that civilian out of here." But before anyone could act, the creature moved. It didn't attack. Instead, it reached out a trembling hand toward Eli, its sharp claws carefully avoiding him. The crowd gasped. The soldiers froze. Eli stood still, his breath caught in his throat. The creature's hand hovered inches from his face. And then, with a voice that carried both pain and hope, it said, "Don't let them. Kill me." The city fell silent. For Eli, the decision was clear. He nodded, his voice steadied despite the fear gripping him. "I won't let them." The monster wasn't a monster at all. It was something else entirely. And Eli was the only one who saw it, the human who listened. The city was restless even hours after the encounter with the creature. News of the monster spread like wildfire, and people whispered rumors in hushed voices. Every media channel displayed blurry images of the towering alien, accompanied by bold captions, "The uncontainable threat," and "Earth's greatest danger yet." Eli sat alone in his small workshop on the outskirts of the city, staring at the greasy tools scattered across his workbench. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the memory of those glowing eyes. They weren't filled with rage or malice. They held something far more unsettling, desperation. He couldn't shake the voice from his mind. "Help me." While the rest of the world labeled the creature a threat, Eli knew there was more to the story. He had seen the pain in its movements, the way it had shielded itself rather than attack. The military was wrong, and deep down, Eli knew he had to find the creature again. The search. Under the cover of darkness, Eli slipped out of his workshop. The city was under strict surveillance, with drones patrolling the skies and soldiers stationed on every corner. Anyone suspected of aiding the alien would face immediate arrest, or worse. Eli kept his head low, blending into the shadows as he moved through the back alleys. His heart pounded with every step, but he couldn't turn back. Somewhere out there, the creature was hiding, injured, and alone. The trail wasn't easy to follow. He avoided main roads and relied on rumors overheard in passing. Strange claw marks on walls, faint scorch marks on the ground, sightings of a shadowy figure in the industrial ruins. Finally, after hours of searching, Eli arrived at the abandoned factory district on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of rust and oil, and the silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water from corroded pipes. First contact. Eli stepped cautiously into one of the larger warehouses, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam landed on a trail of greenish fluid, blood, but not human. His breath caught. He was close. A faint sound echoed from deeper within the warehouse, like metal scraping against metal. Eli followed it, his hands shaking, but his resolve firm. As he rounded a corner, he saw it. The creature was slumped against a wall, its massive frame partially hidden in the shadows. Its once bright eyes were dim, and its breathing was ragged. Its clawed hand clutched its side, where the plasma bolt had struck earlier. The wound oozed the same green fluid, and the creature seemed too weak to notice his presence. Eli froze. This was it, the moment where he would either prove his instincts right or seal his fate. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The creature's head snapped up, its glowing eyes locking onto him. It bared its teeth in a warning snarl. And for a moment, Eli felt a primal fear wash over him. But then he saw it again, that flicker of fear and pain in its gaze. "I'm not here to hurt you," Eli said, taking a cautious step forward. He raised his hands to show he was unarmed. I want to help. The creature tilted its head, as if trying to process his words. Its breathing slowed slightly, but it didn't lower its guard. Eli crouched down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. You said you needed help. I heard you. Remember. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the creature spoke, its voice low and strained. Why would you help me? Eli blinked in surprise. The voice sounded more human than he expected, though there was a strange resonance to it, as if it came from deep within its chest. Because Eli hesitated, searching for the right words. You're not what they think you are. I saw you back there. You could have fought back, but you didn't. You're different. The creature studied him, its sharp gaze piercing through him. Finally, it spoke again. Different is dangerous. Not to me, Eli said firmly. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Let me look at your wound. The creature hesitated, its claws twitching as if deciding whether to attack or retreat. But then it lowered its arm, revealing the gash in its side. Eli winced at the sight. The wound was deep, and the edges were charred from the plasma burn. This is bad, he muttered. But I think I can help. Just don't kill me while I try. Okay. To his surprise, the creature let out a sound that almost resembled a chuckle. You are strange. Eli smiled faintly. You're not the first to say that. Trust begins. As Eli worked, using a first aid kit he had brought along and improvising with scraps of fabric and tools, the creature watched him intently. Why are you here? It finally asked. Eli paused, meeting its gaze. I don't know. I couldn't let them kill you. You don't deserve that. The creature's eyes softened, and for the first time, it seemed to relax. My name is Vera, it said, the words deliberate and heavy. Eli blinked. Vera. That doesn't sound like a monster's name. I was not always. This, Vera said, gesturing to her massive form. They made me into it. My kind. They created me to destroy. Eli's heart sank. Your kind. Who are they? Vera's eyes dimmed slightly. The ones who will come. And if they find me, your world will burn. Eli froze, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been right. Vera wasn't a monster, but she might be the only thing standing between Earth and something far worse. We'll figure it out, Eli said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Vera nodded, a glimmer of hope returning to her eyes. You are strange, she repeated. But maybe that is good. And with that, the unlikeliest of alliances was born. Humanity's judgment. The morning sun cast a harsh, unflattering light over the city as news of the previous night's events reached every screen, every radio, and every household. The media was ablaze with panic. Headlines screamed of an imminent threat, calling the alien the monster of Sector 7. Video clips of the towering creature and its glowing eyes were looped endlessly, accompanied by grim-faced experts warning of Earth's fragile future. At the heart of this chaos was a single grainy image. A young man standing dangerously close to the creature, speaking to it as though it were a friend. Eli's face was unmistakable, captured by a patrolling drone just before the creature disappeared into the shadows. Eli hadn't returned to his workshop since the encounter. He couldn't. The streets were crawling with soldiers, their cold, emotionless helmets scanning every passerby. He hid in the labyrinth of the industrial district, where the air smelled of rust and oil, and the sounds of the city were nothing more than a distant hum. The world turns against him. Eli's face was everywhere now, on street posters, digital bulletins, and even on the sides of patrolling vehicles. The government had declared him a traitor, accusing him of aiding and abetting an alien invader. As he huddled in the corner of a derelict warehouse, his communicator buzzed incessantly. Messages poured in from friends, family, and strangers. Eli, What have you done? His older brother's voice was panicked. They're saying you helped that thing. You need to turn yourself in. Another message, this time from Mara, his closest friend. Eli, this isn't you. You're not a criminal. Just explain yourself. Please. The rest were worse. Messages filled with anger and hatred. Death threats. Promises to hunt him down. He turned the communicator off and buried his head in his hands. He had known the risk the moment he stepped toward Vera. But seeing humanity turn on him so quickly hurt more than he expected. Hunted. By mid-afternoon, the situation grew more dangerous. Military convoys rolled into the industrial district, their tires kicking up clouds of dust. Drones hovered low, scanning every corner and crevice. Eli peered out from behind a stack of rusted metal beams, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew it was only a matter of time before they found him. Suddenly, a faint voice echoed through the warehouse. Eli. He spun around, clutching the wrench he'd been carrying as a makeshift weapon. But it wasn't a soldier or a drone. It was Vera. The alien stood in the shadows, her towering frame hunched to avoid the low-hanging beams. Her eyes glowed faintly, but there was no aggression in her posture. You shouldn't be here, Eli whispered harshly. They're looking for both of us. Vera tilted her head, her voice calm but firm. I am not leaving without you. Eli wanted to argue, to tell her that staying together would only make things worse, but the truth was he didn't want to face this alone. A desperate alliance. As the sound of approaching boots grew louder, Eli led Vera deeper into the maze of warehouses. They moved silently, navigating through corridors filled with broken machinery and discarded debris. Why are you helping me? Vera asked suddenly, her voice breaking the tense silence. Eli glanced at her, surprised by the question. Because I know you're not what they think you are. Vera stopped walking, her glowing eyes fixed on him. And what do you think I am? Eli hesitated. I think you're scared. And I think you're trying to survive, just like the rest of us. For the first time, Vera's expression softened. Your kind is unusual. Most would not see beyond the fear. Before Eli could respond, a loud metallic clang echoed through the space. The soldiers had entered the warehouse. Eli grabbed Vera's arm. We need to move. Now. The betrayal. They slipped through a narrow passage and into an adjacent building. Eli's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. But as they reached the exit, a familiar voice called out. Eli, stop. He turned to see Mara standing there, a small tracking device clutched in her trembling hand. Behind her, a squad of soldiers poured in, their weapons trained on him and Vera. Mara. Eli's voice was filled with disbelief. What are you doing? She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. I had to, Eli. They said if I didn't help them, they'd arrest my family. You don't understand. They're saying this thing will destroy us all. Eli shook his head, his heart sinking. She's not a thing, Mara. She's not what they say she is. The soldiers didn't wait. Their commander barked an order, and they opened fire. Vera roared, a sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. A shimmering shield of energy burst from her body, deflecting the incoming projectiles. Eli grabbed Mara and pulled her behind cover. You didn't have to do this, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, she whispered, but the damage was done. The escape. With the soldiers closing in, Vera unleashed a burst of power that sent the attackers scattering. She grabbed Eli, her massive claws surprisingly gentle, and lifted him off the ground. We cannot stay, she said, her voice urgent. Eli nodded, glancing back at Mara one last time before Vera leaped into the air, her powerful legs propelling them through a shattered window and into the night. A world divided. As they disappeared into the shadows, the city erupted into debate. Some hailed the military's efforts to capture the alien as heroic. Others, inspired by Eli's defiance, began to question the narrative. In the safety of an abandoned shelter far from the city, Eli and Vera sat in silence. They'll never stop coming after us, Eli said finally. Vera looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with something that resembled hope. Then we must show them the truth. How? Eli asked. Vera's gaze hardened. By surviving. Together. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Eli felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they might just stand a chance. The truth beneath the fear. The shelter was little more than a cave hidden in the dense forests far from the city. Vines draped over the entrance, concealing the interior from prying eyes and drones. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but quiet, filled only with the sound of dripping water and Vera's labored breathing. Her wounds, though no longer bleeding, still glowed faintly, a reminder of the danger they had narrowly escaped. Eli sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, staring at the fire he had managed to start. Its flickering light reflected off the smooth walls, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Vera sat across from him, her massive frame hunched to fit the space. He had questions, so many questions, but where to start? You said they'd made you. Eli began, his voice hesitant. Who are they? And why are they after you? Vera's glowing eyes flicked toward him. She remained silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke. My kind, she said slowly, are not born. We are engineered. Eli blinked. Engineered? Like machines? No, we are organic, but altered, designed for war. Her voice grew softer, almost mournful. I was created to destroy. My makers, they do not understand mercy or peace. They see weakness in anything but absolute power. Eli felt a chill run down his spine. And now they're here. On Earth. They will come, Vera said, her gaze dropping to the floor. When they realize I am gone, they will search. And when they find me, they will see your world as a threat, something to be eliminated. Uncovering secrets. Eli leaned back against the wall, trying to process her words. The thought of an alien race powerful enough to create beings like Vera made his stomach twist. How did you get here? He asked. Vera hesitated. I escaped. Escaped. They called me a failure, she continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. I refused to follow orders. I refused to kill when it was unnecessary. To them, I was defective. Worthless. Eli's heart ached at the raw pain in her words. So they tried to get rid of you. They did more than try. She looked at him, her glowing eyes piercing through the dim light. I fled across galaxies, hunted every step of the way. Your planet was my last chance to hide. But now, her voice trailed off, and Eli finished the thought for her. Now they'll come here. Growing bond. Silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Eli watched Vera closely, noticing the way her shoulders slumped, the way her claws curled inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. You didn't choose this, he said softly. Vera looked at him, her expression unreadable. No, but I am still what I am. Eli shook his head. No, you're not. You chose to run instead of becoming the weapon they wanted you to be. That makes you different. It makes you better. Vera didn't respond, but something in her eyes shifted, an ember of hope flickering amidst the despair. You said they'll come, Eli continued. How long do we have? Not long, Vera replied. Days, maybe weeks. They will send scouts first. When they confirm my presence, the fleet will follow. Eli exhaled sharply. Then we need to warn people. They will not listen, Vera said. They fear me too much. Eli thought of the city, of the soldiers who had shot at Vera without hesitation, of the angry messages flooding his communicator. Yeah, he admitted. You're probably right. A revelation. Despite the odds, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be a way to convince humanity. He stared at Vera, his mind racing. What if there's proof? He said suddenly. Vera tilted her head. Proof. something that shows what your makers are planning, something that forces people to see the bigger threat. Vera considered his words. There is a way, she said cautiously. The memory cores in my body contain fragments of their plans, but accessing them is dangerous. How dangerous? I was designed to protect those memories at all costs, she explained. If someone attempts to extract them, it could trigger a defensive response. Eli swallowed hard. You mean you might hurt me? Yes, Vera admitted, unintentionally. But it is possible to disable the failsafe, given enough time. Eli's mind was made up. Then we do it, whatever it takes. Vera stared at him, her glowing eyes narrowing. You are willing to risk your life for this? Eli nodded. If it means saving my planet, then yeah, I'll do it. For the first time, Vera smiled, a small, fleeting gesture that softened her otherwise fearsome appearance. You are strange, human, she said, but perhaps that is what your kind needs. The first step. The next morning, they began the process. Vera guided Eli through the intricate details of her biology, explaining where the memory cores were located and how to deactivate the failsafe. The work was delicate, requiring precision and patience. Eli's hands trembled as he worked, but Vera's steady voice kept him focused. You must trust yourself, she said, and I must trust you. Hours passed, and finally, the failsafe was disabled. Vera closed her eyes, her voice calm but resolute. The memories are ready, but what you see may change everything. Eli connected the makeshift device he had built to Vera's neural interface. A surge of light and sound filled his mind, and suddenly, he was no longer in the shelter. He was standing in a vast, alien landscape, surrounded by towering machines and endless rows of creatures like Vera. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, a command center pulsing with energy. And then he saw it, a fleet of ships, dark and menacing, moving through space toward Earth. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Eli gasping for air. He looked at Vera, his face pale. They're not just coming for you, he said. They're coming to conquer everything. Vera nodded solemnly. Now you understand. Eli clenched his fists. Then we'll make them understand too. Somehow, together, they began to plan. The truth was out there, buried beneath fear and ignorance. And Eli was determined to bring it to light, no matter the cost. Betrayal and sacrifice. The tension in the air was palpable as Eli and Vera worked tirelessly in their hidden shelter. The fragments of data extracted from Vera's memory cores painted a grim picture, a massive alien fleet moving steadily through the void, each ship bristling with weapons capable of reducing planets to ash. They had no more than 2 weeks, maybe less, before the first wave arrived. Eli had no illusions about how the people of Earth would respond if he revealed the truth. Fear, denial, and hatred would be their first reactions. But if there was even a chance to unite them against this greater threat, he had to try. We need to get this data to someone who can broadcast it globally, Eli said, pacing the length of the shelter. Vera's glowing eyes followed him. Your people do not trust me. They will question the authenticity of the data if it comes from you. Eli stopped, frustration evident in his expression. Then what do we do? Hide? Hope they figure it out on their own. Because that's not going to happen. Vera regarded him silently for a moment. There is another way, she said finally. Eli frowned. What way? I can go to them myself, Vera said. Her voice was calm, but her words carried an undercurrent of finality. I will surrender. No, Eli snapped, his voice echoing off the stone walls. That's suicide. They'll kill you before you get a word out. They will listen if I show them the data, Vera argued. And if I die in the process, your world will still have a chance to prepare. Eli shook his head. I'm not letting that happen. A fractured alliance. The argument between them raged well into the night. Eli refused to let Vera sacrifice herself, while Vera remained steadfast in her belief that this was the only way. "You don't understand humans," Eli said, his voice heavy with frustration. "They won't see you as a savior. They'll see you as a threat, no matter what you say or do." "Then why do you fight for them?" Vera asked, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Why risk your life for people who fear and hate me?" Eli hesitated. "Because it's not about them. It's about what's right. And letting you throw your life away isn't right." Vera stared at him for a long moment before speaking softly. "You are brave, Eli. But bravery alone will not stop what is coming." The betrayal. The next day, as they debated their next move, a familiar voice echoed through the shelter's entrance. "Eli, are you in here?" Eli froze. It was Mara. He rushed to the entrance, finding her standing just outside, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Mara, how did you find me?" She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. I've been looking for you." "Everyone has. The city is in chaos, Eli. They think you've betrayed us." "I didn't betray anyone," Eli said firmly. "But we don't have time for this. I need your help." Mara's eyes flicked past him, and for the first time, she saw Vera. The color drained from her face, and she stumbled back. "Eli, what have you done?" "She's not what you think," Eli said quickly. "She's not the enemy. There's a bigger threat coming, Mara, and we need to stop it. But I can't do it without you." Mara didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. "A tracker." "No," Eli whispered, realization dawning on him. "Mara, what did you do?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Bright lights flooded the shelter, and the ground shook with the rumble of heavy machinery. The military had found them. The capture. Soldiers poured into the shelter, their weapons trained on Vera and Eli. "Step away from the alien," the commander barked. "Eli Waters, you are under arrest for treason." Eli raised his hand slowly, his heart pounding. "You don't understand." "Silence," the commander snapped. He turned to Vera, his eyes cold. "And as for you, your execution will serve as a message to anyone who dares to side with your kind." Vera growled low in her throat, her claws flexing, but Eli stepped in front of her. "Don't," he said quietly. "If you fight, they'll kill you for sure." Vera hesitated, her eyes meeting his. "And if I do not?" "They'll kill both of us," Eli admitted. Vera's gaze hardened. "Then I will not let them take you." Before anyone could react, Vera moved. In a blur of motion, she knocked Eli aside and unleashed a powerful energy wave, sending the soldiers flying. The room erupted into chaos as Vera fought with a ferocity Eli had never seen before. A costly escape. Amid the chaos, Eli grabbed Mara, pulling her behind cover. "You betrayed me," he said, his voice filled with hurt. "I didn't have a choice," Mara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They threatened my family, Eli. I didn't know what else to do." Eli wanted to yell, to blame her for everything, but there was no time. "Stay here," he said. "I'll fix this." Vera's energy shield began to flicker, and Eli knew she couldn't hold out much longer. "Vera," he shouted, "we need to go." Vera turned to him, her body glowing with residual energy. "Go where, Eli?" "There is no place left to run." "Yes, there is," Eli said, determination in his voice. "But you have to trust me." Vera hesitated before nodding. She reached out, grabbing Eli and Mara, and leaped through a hole in the shelter's wall, disappearing into the night. A sacrificial choice. Hours later, far from the city, they found a moment of quiet. Vera's energy was almost depleted, and her wounds had reopened during the fight. "You can't keep doing this," Eli said, his voice filled with emotion. "You'll kill yourself." "If it keeps you alive," Vera replied, "then it is worth it." Eli shook his head. "We're in this together. No more sacrifices. We'll find another way." Vera looked at him, Her eyes filled with something that resembled hope. Together, she agreed softly. But deep down, both of them knew the sacrifices were far from over. The greater threat. The air in the makeshift hideout was thick with tension. A small campfire crackled between Eli and Vera, casting flickering shadows on the crumbling walls of the abandoned observatory they had taken refuge in. It was high in the mountains, far from the prying eyes of drones and soldiers, but isolation wasn't enough to bring peace. They both knew the storm was coming, one far worse than any they'd faced before. Mara sat apart from them, wrapped in a blanket. Her gaze alternated between Eli and Vera, her mind clearly wrestling with guilt and fear. She had been silent since their narrow escape, but the weight of her betrayal hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. "They'll find us again," Mara said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They'll try," Eli replied, his tone sharper than he intended. "But that's not our biggest problem anymore." Vera, who had been sitting motionless, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon, spoke in her usual calm but commanding tone. "The scouts are here." Mara's eyes widened. "What do you mean, scouts?" Vera turned to her, and for the first time, there was no trace of hostility in her gaze. "My makers do not send their fleet without first confirming the target. The ships in orbit are not the main force. They are the vanguard, designed to observe, infiltrate, and destabilize." Eli leaned forward. "How long before they send the main fleet?" Vera's claws flexed slightly. "Once the scouts confirm my presence and assess Earth's defenses, they will signal the fleet. Your planet will have days, perhaps hours, before the invasion begins." A chilling discovery. Eli rubbed his temples, trying to think. "If we could stop the scouts before they send that signal." "They are not easily stopped," Vera interrupted. "They have technology far beyond yours. Stealth capabilities, adaptive shielding, and weapons that your people cannot counter." "Then we're doomed," Mara muttered, her voice filled with despair. "No," Eli said, standing up. "We're not. We've got something they don't." Vera tilted her head, curious. "And what is that?" "Surprise," Eli said, a spark of determination in his eyes. "They think we're weak, unprepared. But if we can find them before they finish their reconnaissance, we might have a shot." Vera regarded him for a long moment. "You speak with hope, but hope alone does not win wars." "It's not just hope," Eli countered. "It's strategy. If we can take out their scouts, even just one of their ships, we can use their own tech against them, hack their systems, learn their weaknesses. There's always a way. The hunt begins." Vera stood and stretched her towering frame. "I can locate them. Their technology may be advanced, but I know how they think. I was built to serve them, after all." Mara looked skeptical. "And how exactly are we supposed to fight something that can probably level an entire city with a single shot?" Eli gave her a determined look. "We fight smart. Hit them where it hurts, and make every move count." Vera nodded. "Your plan is reckless, but it may work. Their arrogance will blind them to the possibility of resistance." Using fragments of data from Vera's memory cores, they identified likely locations where the scouts might be operating. High-altitude regions and remote areas were ideal for their stealth ships, minimizing the risk of detection. The closest match was a desert plateau several hundred miles away, a barren wasteland perfect for hiding advanced technology. The first encounter. They traveled through the night, avoiding major roads and checkpoints. The journey was grueling, especially with Vera's injuries and Mara's growing anxiety. But Eli pushed them forward, driven by the knowledge that every hour brought Earth closer to annihilation. By dawn, they reached the plateau. The air was eerily still, and the landscape stretched out in all directions, an endless sea of red and gold sand. "There," Vera said, pointing to a shimmer in the distance. It looked like a heat mirage, but Eli knew better. "That's it," he said. As they approached, the mirage resolved into a sleek black ship partially buried in the sand. It was smaller than Eli had expected, but still imposing, with sharp angles and an almost predatory design. "They're here," Vera said, her voice low. Suddenly, a mechanical hum filled the air. Eli barely had time to react before a group of scout drones emerged from the ship, their metallic bodies gleaming in the morning sun. "Get down," Eli shouted, diving behind a boulder. Vera didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her glowing eyes narrowing as the drones opened fire. With a wave of her hand, she generated a shimmering energy shield, deflecting the projectiles. Eli peeked out from behind cover, his heart pounding. "How do we take them out?" "Hit their cores," Vera said. "They are small but vulnerable. Aim carefully." Eli grabbed the plasma rifle they had scavenged from the soldiers and took aim. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus. With a deep breath, he pulled the trigger. The shot hit its mark, and one of the drones exploded in a burst of light and shrapnel. "Nice shot," Mara called, surprising herself by firing at another drone and managing to damage its wing. The signal. As they destroyed the last of the drones, the scout ship began to power up. Its engines roared to life, and a beam of light shot into the sky. "They're sending the signal," Vera shouted. Eli's mind raced. "Can you stop it?" "I can try," Vera said, sprinting toward the ship despite her injuries. Eli and Mara followed, covering her as more drones emerged from hidden compartments. Vera reached the base of the ship and placed her hand on its hull. Her body glowed as she interfaced with its systems, her expression one of intense concentration. "Hurry," Eli yelled, firing at another wave of drones. Vera's voice was strained. "I am disabling the transmission, but it will take time." Time they didn't have. The cost of victory. The battle raged on, with Eli and Mara fighting desperately to keep the drones at bay. Finally, Vera's glow intensified, and the beam of light vanished. "It is done," she said, her voice weak. But as she stepped back from the ship, a loud alarm blared from within. The ship's self-destruct sequence had activated. "Run," Eli shouted, grabbing Mara's arm and pulling her away. Vera hesitated, her gaze lingering on the ship. "Go," she said. "No," Eli yelled. "You're coming with us." But Vera didn't move. "If I stay, I can ensure the ship's destruction. If it survives, they will still have the data they need." Eli's heart sank. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Vera said gently. She turned to him, her glowing eyes soft. "You gave me hope, Eli. Now let me give your world a chance." Before Eli could argue, Vera placed her hand on his shoulder. "Live," she said. And then she turned and stepped back toward the ship. The explosion lit up the desert, a blinding flash followed by a shockwave that knocked Eli and Mara to the ground. When the dust settled, there was nothing left of the ship or Vera. Eli sat in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. But as the sun rose higher in the sky, one thing became clear. Vera's sacrifice had bought them time. Time to fight. Time to unite. Time to survive. Redemption and understanding. The explosion's aftermath lingered in the air, a silence so profound it seemed as though the entire desert was holding its breath. Eli stared at the smoldering crater where Vera had made her final stand, his heart heavy and his mind numb. She was gone, her towering form reduced to memory and ash. But her sacrifice had ensured one thing. The signal to her creators had been stopped. Mara sat a few feet away, her knees pulled to her chest, her face pale and streaked with tears. Neither of them spoke for what felt like hours. The weight of Vera's choice hung between them, filling the air with unspoken grief. She didn't have to do that, Mara whispered finally, her voice trembling. "Yes, she did," Eli replied, his voice hollow. "Because no one else would." A world in chaos. By the time Eli and Mara returned to civilization, the world had erupted into chaos. News of the destroyed alien scout ship had spread quickly, with conspiracy theories and fear-mongering dominating every broadcast. Governments scrambled to prepare for a potential invasion, mobilizing armies and imposing strict curfews. Eli, however, wasn't interested in the panic. He had something far more important to do. They had managed to salvage the data Vera had extracted from the ship before its destruction, a treasure trove of intel that included maps of the incoming fleet, schematics of their ships, and most importantly, vulnerabilities in their technology. Eli stared at the glowing disk in his hand, the weight of its importance pressing down on him. "This is it," he said. "This is what she died for." "And what are you going to do with it?" Mara asked, her tone wary. Eli didn't hesitate. "I'm going to show the world the truth. Broadcasting the truth." Getting the data to the public wasn't easy. The government had locked down communication networks, censoring anything that might incite further panic. Eli and Mara had to rely on an underground resistance group, a network of hackers and activists who had grown disillusioned with the government's authoritarian response. The leader of the group, a wiry man named Cade, examined the disk with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "You're telling me this thing has proof of an alien invasion?" Cade asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not just proof," Eli said. "It has their plans, their weaknesses. Everything we need to fight back." Cade nodded slowly. "All right. But if we're doing this, we're going all the way. Once this goes out, there's no going back." Eli's jaw tightened. There's nothing to go back to. The broadcast. The team worked tirelessly to prepare the broadcast, bypassing government firewalls and hijacking satellite signals. When the moment finally came, Eli stood in front of the camera, his heart pounding. "This is Eli Waters," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "If you're watching this, you already know the world is on the brink of something unprecedented, but the truth is worse than you've been told." He took a deep breath, holding up the disk. "This is data from an alien scout ship that landed on Earth. It proves that an invasion is coming, an invasion that will destroy everything we know unless we stand together." The broadcast cut to footage of Vera's memory cores, the alien fleet moving through the stars, and the schematics of their ships. Eli's voice continued in the background. "They see us as weak, divided. But we're not. We're capable of more than they realize. And if we use this information wisely, we can stop them." The broadcast ended with a single message. Humanity's survival depends on unity. It's time to fight back. A divided response. The world's reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted in major cities as people demanded transparency from their governments. Some called Eli a hero, while others labeled him a traitor, accusing him of fabricating the data to sow chaos. World leaders convened emergency meetings, struggling to reconcile the truth of the broadcast with their own agendas. For the first time, humanity was forced to confront a common enemy, one that threatened their very existence. Eli and Mara watched the chaos unfold from the safety of the Resistance's underground base. "Do you think they'll come together?" Mara asked, her voice uncertain. "They have to," Eli said, though his tone lacked conviction. "If they don't, everything Vera did will have been for nothing." The first strike. Days later, the alien fleet appeared on the edge of Earth's solar system. Massive and ominous, their ships blocked out the stars, casting an eerie shadow over the planet. Eli's broadcast had done its job. Humanity was ready, or as ready as they could be. The nations of Earth had pooled their resources, creating a united defense force equipped with every weapon and piece of technology they could muster. Eli stood on the deck of one of the command ships, a sense of grim determination settling over him. He wasn't a soldier, but he had earned his place here. The data Vera had sacrificed herself for had given humanity a fighting chance, and Eli intended to see it through. The first wave of alien ships descended, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like knives. The battle that followed was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. Earth's forces fought valiantly, using Vera's data to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. But it wasn't enough. The turning point. As the battle raged on, Eli realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or firepower, it was their ability to adapt. He remembered Vera's words, "Their arrogance will blind them." Using a captured alien ship, Eli and a small team launched a desperate mission to infiltrate the enemy's command vessel. The plan was simple: plant a virus in their central systems using Vera's modified memory core. If it worked, it would cripple their fleet. The mission was chaotic and harrowing. Eli's team faced relentless resistance, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. Redemption. In the final moments, as the virus began to take effect, Eli stood on the alien command deck, staring at the holographic image of the fleet breaking apart. He thought of Vera, her towering form, and her unwavering resolve. "She believed in us," he whispered. And she was right. The alien ships began to retreat, their systems compromised, and their formation shattered. Earth had won. Barely. A new era. In the aftermath, humanity was forever changed. The scars of the battle were visible across the planet, but so was a newfound sense of unity. Eli returned to the crater where Vera had made her sacrifice. He knelt in the sand, placing a small makeshift marker in her memory. "You saved us," he said softly, "not just from them, but from ourselves." As he stood and looked toward the horizon, he felt a sense of hope for the first time in weeks. Humanity had survived the impossible, and though the road ahead would be difficult, they now had something they had lacked before: understanding. Vera's legacy wasn't just survival, it was the reminder that even in the face of fear and hatred, redemption and unity were possible.